So, would improved funding for housing decrease any of the burden that we see on hospitals?
Yeah, I mean, I think would increase, well, I'm not an expert on the health side of things, so I'll be upfront about that. But I do think what I've seen and what I've read, if you look at things like the random, the trials around housing first, and the trials around putting people in housing, is that it does seem that if people are housed, and then you actually provide the supports to go with that housing, you hook them up with doctors and so on, that will reduce the impact on the healthcare, at least the emergency healthcare system. I don't know how it would actually impact the larger healthcare system, because presumably if people are actually having problems and they're actually getting health care on a regular and ongoing basis, it actually might cost some money to actually help provide that health care on an ongoing basis as opposed to just an emergency basis. But there does seem to be overall cost benefits, I believe, in terms of at least general services, in terms of addressing people who are homeless or so it does seem like, and I think that I just read that in a report that people who are homeless are up to 5 times more likely to, or 5 times more often be going to an emergency health unit for support. So, I think one of the things we know the expense of using the emergency units at our hospitals and so on, as opposed to using primary kind of care, or I'm not sure if primary care is the right word. I'm not being an expert in this, but using your local doctor or what have you, right? Health unit. So presumably, I mean, it could cost more if you actually, in some ways, I think it's a mug's game. For me, we get focused a lot on the finances. Are we going to save money on this? Or we're going to whatever. To me, that's kind of a mug's game. I don't really know. I mean, I would like to think that if we actually house people and we want to actually, I mean, what's interesting about going back to the housing first question for a moment, and I know that we don't want to necessarily bring questions together here, but even looking at the Mental Health Commission of Canada study, where they used what I would call, and what one person I interviewed at the City of Toronto who was involved in the creation of the Toronto case study, was called the gold standard. They made sure they had rent geared, they made sure they got them into places that were affordable. They made them have follow-up support workers as part of the condition of being involved in the trial. They had the supports. They had everything at their disposal. There are still many people who did not remain in their housing using that gold standard. And so part of what they're trying to do is figure out, well, okay, what additional supports do we need? How do we explain that? So going back to the housing first, that is not going to be a panacea. It's a great way to do it, but housing first, or it could be, but they need to figure out some more things there. But it does seem to be that if you're going to put people in housing, you want them to remain stably housed. In some cases, that means providing support. It could be mental health support. It could require healthcare supports, and that might actually mean investing in some of those supports, as opposed to just thinking about how do we save money on those supports. Hopefully over the long term, that would be a cost saving. But I think this kind of like trying to snapshot it is to me a bit of a mug's game, and it gets us into a question about cost benefit of whether people should be housed or not. So I try to stay away from some of that a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right, and that it very much echoes what we've been hearing in these conversations, that, we're sort of, as a society, very focused on saving money, but that it's not the responsibility of the homelessness sector to save the healthcare sector money, or, that perhaps it
Right.
wouldn't save money. But either way, it's not about money, it's about the right thing to do for humans.
Yeah, and I think that's I think that's a great way to put it, that it's not up to the homelessness sector to save healthcare in this country, or to reduce the savings of healthcare, right? That's an excellent way to put it.